I wonder if some of you have seen the recent movie Peace by Chocolate. Last December, Jay and I were in Halifax for New Year's Eve, and while we were in Halifax, our friends took us to one of the newest stores on the beautiful waterfront there. The store is Peace by Chocolate. It was bustling that day, and we had not heard the story, but it captured our attention. Dozens of chocolate bars of all different varieties, each with a heartwarming story on the package about the journey of new Canadians. And so after that, we had to watch the movie that came out this summer. Maybe some of you have as well. Here's a synopsis. Issam Hadhad and his family arrive in Nova Scotia as refugees from Syria in 2015. They are sponsored by a group in Antigonish. And like so many refugee families, the Hadhads endured the hardships of adapting to a new home while grieving the violence from which they had come. Tarek, the 20-something son, had a dream of going to medical school, and he was the only one in the Hadhad family who spoke English, so he ended up doing a lot of translating on behalf of the family. Issam, the father, struggled to gain employment in the small maritime town. But one day, Frank, who was part of the refugee sponsorship team, happened to taste some chocolate that Issam had made. You see, back at home, the Hadhad family owned and operated a renowned chocolate business in Damascus for over 30 years. But in 2012, the factory was destroyed in the conflict in Syria, and the family fled to Lebanon. Well, soon after Frank's first taste of Issam's homemade chocolate, it was being sold at the local church bazaar in Antigonish. And then, as orders poured in, Issam outgrew the small kitchen in their home. So the community built a little shed for Issam next to their house on the property, and Peace by Chocolate was born. It's a great name, isn't it? It's a lot better than Death by Chocolate. Now, it was not without struggles. Some in Antigonish resented the attention on the new family in town. The local chocolatier felt that she was being pushed out of business. But the sponsorship team persisted because of the heart that they had for the family and for the mission of resettlement. Well, as the business grew, Tarek, the son, became greatly conflicted within. He had applied to many medical schools around Canada, across Canada, and had been declined. But one day, he received an offer to attend medical school in Newfoundland. Tarek had to make the difficult choice between leaving his family to pursue a dream or remaining to help interpret the language and to help his father grow the business. In the end, Tarek stayed in Nova Scotia. A new factory was built with help from Sobeys, a local maritime company, and today, almost 7 years later, you can buy Peace by Chocolate in the original shed in Antigonish, in the shiny flagship outlet in Halifax, and at various small retailers across Canada, including several in our area in Hamilton. It's a story of persistence of the heart on the part of a family in need and a small town that stepped up and persevered through challenges. What a great Canadian story. Well, when I read the parable of the widow and the unjust judge, I read a story of persistence of the heart. You see, the judge does not come off looking all that great. I wondered if I should say a prayer before this sermon because, as you know, lawyers have had their moment in recent weeks. Today we move a little higher up the chain, I guess. But Jesus described the judge as neither fearing God nor respecting people. But the widow's persistence finally stirs the judge to act. Yes, the story records what the judge supposedly says to himself in response. It's interesting that Luke records the inner conversation of the person. But what we don't know is how the judge actually felt or what the judge actually expressed outwardly after the widow had been helped. Because, like everyone else, they have hearts. We all do. It's just that so many people don't first open their hearts to others in the public sphere. Because, don't we think it's seen as a weakness? The easier road is the head response that says, I'm acting to get her off my back. That's the response that tends to garner affirmation in the wide world. We have heard it many times. How many times have you heard people say, those in need should help themselves, handouts only enable, it's time to get tough on crime, and many more. We've heard them all. And I've been there before personally. It happened just last week to me. A man called and said he and his wife had been in a local motel staying for 5 nights because they'd been evicted from their apartment and they needed help to pay the bill at the motel. Well, I listened to the long message on my phone and I thought to myself, I don't want to deal with this. I don't have the energy to deal with this. I'll not return the call and hopefully they find help somewhere else. That was my initial response. Well, a few days later, he called back. And I thought to myself, well, I'll just give him what he wants so he'll go away. And so I went over to the motel and I paid the bill from our assistance fund. And he thanked me for the help and I hurried off to a meeting. But after the fact, I realized I could have taken the time to listen more closely to the heart of the story. Oh, the reactions that we often take and make in the moment. Sometimes the weariness can get the best of us, can't it? It was probably the case with Jesus' disciples. Because time had passed. We're now into the 18th chapter of Luke, and several generations of people have passed. Enthusiasm and faithfulness were being eroded. They're wondering, will this good news message sustain us for the long term, or is it just another fleeting idea? And some had even experienced personal persecution. Will not God grant justice to God's chosen ones who cry to God day and night? Will God delay long in helping them? These are the questions Jesus poses to them and to us. And then Jesus provides the response and the wondering that is still with us today. Jesus says, God will quickly grant justice to them, not delay. But will God find faith on earth? That question hangs at the end of the parable. Will God find faith on earth? In other words, will we act as God would act in the time of need? That's the crux for me of this parable. Will we act as God would act swiftly in the time of need? Well, today we celebrate with open hearts the arrival of the Raslans in Canada, and there are many people who have persisted for years with not only their intellect, their time, their efforts, and their skills, but also with their hearts. And as I suggested on social media the other day, sometimes answers to prayer are more obvious than other times. As Luke introduces the parable, the gospel writer very interestingly says this: Jesus told them a parable about their need to pray always and not to lose heart. Not to lose heart. It doesn't say not to lose mind or spirit or skill or time. It says not to lose heart. Parables are language events in which something powerful about faith happens. Frank and his team in Antigonish, Nova Scotia, persisted for years with their hearts to help the Hodhod family. And Bob and Mary and Matt and so many others on the team and beyond here in Burlington have persisted for years. Yes, with their heads and their skill and their time and their energy, but also with their hearts. And through their persistence, all of our hearts have been opened to the joy and the pain of living. As God has loved us, so we have loved in the receiving and in the giving. The new law of love has been written on our hearts, a new and everlasting covenant, a new promise from God that says, I am with you always. Because, friends, it's what's written on the heart that persists. Indeed, we have wept with those who weep. We have shared the joy of sister brother. In the welcome of Christ, we welcome one another.